does it say?
Oh.
Here we go. So there's going to be something wrong. Do you want me to get up? Maybe this is what... Okay, you might have to get the boys. The boys.
Oh, like really down now. You've got 4 advanced or the other. I don't like this setup either. It's horrible. Come on. Put Rian over there. Put Rian over there and I'll push us down. And you can just like spread out. You really press it bloody tight. Yeah, it just feels really unbalanced. I don't like unbalanced either. Those councillors that do not receive our implementation do produce what you do. Hey, after you were asking about Te Ha update, it's just come through. Round. Thanks. I have my pie. Third. Fourth. And the fifth. 8 a.m. Yep. So that was 28 hours. 8:30 p.m. That's terrible. 8:30. 10, 12. 12, 5. 36. Yep, so we've got 28 hours. The first overflow went for 28 hours.
That was on Queen's.
And we can. The next one went for 36.
Even prior to that, we didn't have
But we didn't expect that one, remember? It was totally localized out of the blue. So we can't always.
So we don't look any monitoring of to know that that's going to happen.
We don't have modelling resolution that's going to tell you what's going to happen on a mini catchment scale like that. No fucking way. It's impossible.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, we don't. So the first event went for 28 hours, nearly 1.5 days.
Yeah.
The next one went for 36 hours. The next one went for 35 hours.
So on a normal rain event, how many hours are
It all depends.
on average?
So basically, I don't know. We've never looked at it that way, but I'm now intrigued by how much in the past week, how much sewage has actually gone out. So if we're saying the pipe's this big and it's full and it's run for this long, you can work out how much has gone out of every pipe. And the probably if we gave it magnitude of how much has went out there, we might actually go.
How do they measure that?
They don't.
No, they could.
They probably wouldn't want to because it's not a good story.
It's not a good story.
You could work out the area of the pipe. It does. And then we had one in April last year and one in September.
Oh, you think? Oh, would you be able to come in? And you have 30 tomorrow? No, sorry.
What for?
An extraordinary contribution.
Or what's extraordinary? What's extraordinary, Eva?
Because it's extraordinary relief, right? It's extraordinarily confidential.
Extraordinary, super confidential. Oh yeah, what went down? Oh yeah. Yes, I will be there at 11:30.
Oh, no, right. No. Mind you, you did the best representation review for this proposal.
Thanks for that reminder.
Yeah. I don't think I'm ever going to stop getting there on that one.
We got there in the end. Just a bit slow.
True. I did wonder though what happened. It just did it.
Oh my God, have you seen this? This is also about the forestry slash. Come and have a look. Cartoon. It's broken. It's broken. Not swimmable. Oh, Jessie. That is so good. So wonderful. It's so good. You need to show your husband that one, Heather. Send it to me.
My husband was hands and arms.
I bet he was.
Oh, what'd you do?
I just force closed the app and reopened it just by doing the swipe up thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's right.
You're asking. Yeah.
The industry isn't the problem. Oh, yeah. And decisions that were made when they didn't actually have the knowledge, which we've always had the knowledge.
Well,
What we do, oh, no, in terms of forestry. Switzerland, if you look in Europe, they did what we do today 50 years ago. They must be looking at New Zealand and Maori, knowing done masters. So our land's worse than theirs. Yeah.
so I mean, there are definitely solutions.
Definitely.
But, you know, I was saying to Karen, it doesn't help when we like on the national program, kind of looking after the environment, like long.
Who was that? A tributary act.
Yeah,
That's only the same goes around.
Yeah.
Mangatokiro.
or the
Mangatokiro?
yeah,
Yeah,
and
that.
it happens all the time. I mean, we can't walk there on a cyclone.
Well, wait, why doesn't it have a flood protection scheme like the Waikawa?
And it floods. And it floods.
I'm over it. I'm not already.
What we need to, is it something we need to talk about?
I don't know what causes. That's more of a troubleshooting issue.
But it
that
happened
you
at
guys,
regional transport.
yeah. So it happened there as well. So we need to figure out what's causing it. It's not something we would expect you guys to have to deal with.
Yeah, so
Because the process is still right. It's just there's an issue with something else we need to sort out. But we don't know what's causing it. But all I did this morning was essentially reclaim post on this. Yeah, I'm just seeing if I leave this meeting. I went reclaim host.
Ah, okay.
And then I went on this one and I went leave. So the meeting was still running. It was just running from this one. Then I left on this and re-invited it to the meeting and then joined it back and then made it host and left on the laptop. And doing it that way seemed to make it come right. But yeah, it doesn't look like it's done it for this one, which is good.
I'd like to welcome our deputation. No, not those two. Paul, sorry, Paul, I just had a wee blank. Paul Erickson, who has a deputation. I'd like to welcome Stuart Hennies, who's the principal scientist from GNS, and Kate Jacobs. Welcome to the meeting. They will speak to us later. Welcome to your worship, who's with us this afternoon, and Mr. Burdett, Councillor Burdett. So thank you very much. There are no apologies, even though there's an empty chair, I don't believe. I do. Are there any declarations of interest? No? And no requests for leave of absence, acknowledgements and tributes, public input and petitions is Mr. Erickson. And we move to the confirmation of the non-confidential minutes of the meeting of the 2nd of May. Thank you. Moved Councillor McLean and seconded Councillor Finn, was it? Councillor Stoltz. Are you happy that they be signed as a true and correct record of the last meeting? All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you. So I'll invite Paul Erickson to come and speak to us. Thank you. It's Mr. Erickson. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, my name's Paul Erickson. I'm a principal at Grant & Cook Surveyors Limited. Today really is an objection, probably more than a deputation. It's because I'm objecting to a residential development contribution being imposed on a non-residential site. I did object late last year, and I've been through a series of emails and meetings and basically told that, no, you're wrong. So as far as I'm concerned, it's wrong and it needs to be righted. The incident is unfortunately symptomatic of consultants and the public's wide-ranging concerns over some council officers' inconsistent and sometimes incorrect implementation of rules and policy set by the district plan and legislation. Now, this development contribution was, as I say, was imposed on a rural industrial site. Now, having gone through the development contribution policy, to me, it's quite clear that there's no mandate to charge this on that particular site, and it needs to be left until the activities of that site are known. It seems to me that there's a bit of a feeling in council that, no, you're just trying to delay it. Well, I understand under the residential policy that you don't have any, there's no way you can delay it. You have to accept that, that's the way it is. But under this situation, it's not known what those activities are going to be. So to actually use the residential criteria is, to me, patently wrong. And in the policy, it's actually got the types of activities and the multiplying factor for when a new activity starts. The site's a bare site at the moment. What happened with this was that I took my client along to a meeting. We were told that, oh, well, yes, you can object to it, you can take it to a hearing. These people had 2 or 3 buyers waiting to, well, they were already signed up. So it was critical that this deal happened, that these sales went ahead. So fortunately, they were forced, really, arm up the back to pay this levy. And so I believe that that levy should be refunded and that the appropriate imposition of development contribution imposed at the time that the activity is known. So one of the problems we've got with consultants is that people want to know what their costs are going to be. And we have to rely on what's in the policy wording to try and advise them of that. And to be honest, it's a bit like a lottery sometimes, just knowing what's going to come out, some certain decisions. So I'll just, there's a lot of correspondence here and a lot of to and fro, but I'll probably summarise it with a few sort of simple questions. and answers. A question, is this a residential development? No, it is zoned rural industrial A. Was a residential contribution imposed? Yes. Does the written development contribution policy have any mandate to charge residential contributions on non-residential developments or have any base rate? No. Does the Local Government Act 2002 allow a component for reserves to be charged on non-residential developments? No. And the DC policy reflects that. Do we know what activity will be carried out on the new lot? No, we don't. Okay, then why was the DC charged and it didn't wait until the type of activity was known?
Thank you. Oh, okay. We appreciate what you're sharing with us. We can only ask you questions, Mr. Erickson. So can I ask you, have you written and asked for the payment to be refunded? Has that happened?
No, because I was told that it wouldn't be, that that had to be imposed and that was it. So I know I haven't gone to that.
No, that's okay. I'm just trying to understand exactly where we are right now. It would still need to be in writing. You know, we can't authorize, we can investigate it, but we can't authorise that be refunded until till council would receive a letter stating that again, and the questions that you've just answered from the policy.
I understand that, but I've wasted an awful lot of time and money and writing emails, and the answer's been no, so I just want to go from there. So what you're saying is to write again. Well,
I hear that, but for us to be able to follow up, we have to, since the solution, I suspect, is that there is a refund of that dollar sum, which is what you're asking for, that needs to come to us in writing, Your Worship, doesn't it? Needs to come to council in writing. Absolutely, but that is the... No, not us politically, but to council. It can't be dealt with, but we can follow it up. Councillor Stoltz, you were going to ask a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say there are so many unknowns here, and this is the first time that what the Mayor just said, this has been dealt with by council officers. So it's difficult for us to even ask questions because
Yeah, I didn't quite realise I'd be in front of a full council meeting. I thought that there would be like a small committee that I could discuss this with. Yeah. It's just that there's nothing left for me to be able to go really, and part of the objection process, I guess, is the next level, which is you people.
Who would you like to give some guidance, Mr. Zannon? It requires a letter requesting a refund on the basis of the information that Mr. Erickson's provided, doesn't it?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is not for us to respond to here. Mr. Erickson can write to councillors, and staff can certainly get back to councillors with the responses and what has happened and our decisions.
So that's writing to the councillors?
No, I think it needs to be to the Mayor and the Chief Executive, doesn't it? Not to us as individuals, because we don't have that authority.
No, what I'm saying is Mr. Erickson will choose to write to whoever he wants to. Yes, he can address it to the Chief Executive and to the Mayor. That's right, and staff will respond through that route.
I'm sorry, we can only ask questions technically. It's not
Excuse me, Madam Chair, could I just for clarification, Mr. Erickson has written previously to the Chief Executive on this matter, and that was decision was for Director of Lifelines at that stage to respond back directly to Mr. Erickson in terms of hearing the position as presented today and all the detail associated with it. So that process has already occurred. I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. So you're saying there's been a reply?
That's correct.
Thank you.
I didn't actually write to the CEO. I wrote to David Wilson.
Thank you. Ms. Councillor Fenn.
Sorry, thank you. That's not clear to me either. I understand, Mr. Erickson, that you've written to staff and they've responded back, but in that particular letter, was that requesting the refund?
No, not at that stage. Actually, probably it may have been in the wording. Yep. But I was more concerned. Well, I'm concerned about the amount, but I'm also concerned about what I consider the incorrect implementation of the policy, which affects everybody, not just.
We understand that, and I think because of our process, and thank you for that information, our hands are tied, but I do think you need to write again, appendix the material, send a copy to the Mayor and send a copy to the Chief Executive, seeking the refund for what the cost has been. I think that's all we can do. Thank you, Mr. Erickson, for coming. I'm sorry if it's a little frustrating, not being able to talk it through, but that's not the process.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're moved to the action sheet, which is appendice to the minutes. Thank you.
At 6 weeks ago, we had the...
Is this related to the action sheet?
Yes.
Yep, cool.
6 weeks. It's not there. 6 weeks ago.
Now, is that related?
It is related because it is not there. So 6 weeks ago, we had a presentation from the lovely lady from the Generation Zero, Ellie Craft. And at that meeting, we decided that this committee will make a recommendation to council for the Mayor, who in the meantime have received an email from her, for us to sign up to that. And I remember we did say that this committee would make a recommendation around that.
Subsequent to receiving a paper, not just straight out of the blue.
She gave us stuff, and our staff were going to write a paper making a recommendation to council. So that is what's missing from the action sheet. That still needs to happen.
Thank you. We'll put it on the action sheet. Thank you very much, Councillor Stolt. Are there any other matters missing from the action sheet or updates? A couple of items are complete, so will not appear next time. No further matters from the action sheet?
No.
No. And the plan, the work plan is there for your information, the governance work plan. So we move, I don't believe we have any extraordinary business, nor notice of motion, nor adjourned business. So we move to item 18259 and welcome Representative GNS. Would you like to come to the table? Thank you. Welcome. It's good to have you here. Both of these good people I've met before because some of the monitors are actually on Wensleydale, so you were there more than once over the summer, weren't you?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Cave?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd just like to welcome Drs. Henrys and Jacobs to the meeting. They've been extremely busy over this last summer and will be busy over the next summer, doing a lot of work to inform us about the hazards in the Hikurangi margin. I don't have anything more to say, but just to welcome them to the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Why is that screen not going, Ms. Conn? It's okay, we can move our chairs, but we'll look forward to hearing what you've got to say and tell us when you start the presentation and we'll move so we can see it.
Okay. Kia ora. Thank you very much for the invite to this meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so Katie and I will present today some of the work that we're doing. I'll give you a motivation of why we're doing this work on the entire Rafiti, and I'll describe to you some of the work that we've done in the last summer and give you a taste of what we plan to do for this coming summer. And then I'll show you some of the results and how those outcomes may be important for Tai Rafiti.
Thank you.
So I can start now, and I have a PowerPoint presentation. Please kind of interrupt me. I'll try and get through this in a timely fashion. And if we're delayed at any point, Madam Chair, please just tell me to carry on.
Thank you.
Yes, okay. So here we are, seismic imaging initiatives to understand the hazards posed by the Ecological Subduction Zone. This is New Zealand's largest plate boundary fault. What's seismic imaging mean? Seismic imaging means something like a CAT scan, like a body imaging. So if you go to the hospital and you get an image of your inside of your brain or your body, then we're trying to do that inside the earth. So we call that seismic imaging because ultimately you'll see that we wanted to get at diagnosing the peril. And it's a bit like a health analogy. In order to do that, we need to get as much information about the inside of the Raukuma Peninsula as we can. So the subduction zone that we all sit on is the focus of our research. It lies beneath the North Island here. And so the trench, the Hikurangi Trench, lies about 100 kilometres east of us in Gisborne. And this is where the Pacific plate dives down beneath the Australian plate. And it's that boundary that is the cause of major hazards. It's part of a zone of subduction that extends from Wellington all the way north to East Cape and further north to Tonga Kermadec. And so it's subduction zones worldwide that have caused the most destructive earthquakes. The 2011 Tohoku earthquake, so that little picture there is a tsunami that resulted from that event. Sumatran earthquake earlier. So subduction zones cause a lot of damage, and that's why we care about trying to understand that plate boundary. And interestingly, in 1947, there were 2 tsunami earthquakes just offshore Gisborne here, caused a little bit of damage. So those bars on the coastline represent the run-up. There was a 10-metre run-up in the area just north of Gisborne. Caused a bit of damage, but no lives were lost. Importantly for Tairāwhiti, that actually those events didn't cause a lot of ground shaking, but the tsunami still resulted. So it's really important for us to understand the mechanism of slip on the plate boundary to try and get a handle of tsunami earthquakes, regular fast earthquakes, and slow earthquakes. It's a whole spectrum of motion. Okay, so motivation for doing this at Tairāwhiti is, so there's a little brain scan image. It's just a kind of what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to understand that slip behaviour. Because the Hikurangi margin here is at a very shallow depth, then it provides a real opportunity globally to try and understand the slip behaviour. So some of the information that we learn here can be passed on to Japan, Costa Rica, North America, Philippines, Indonesia, for example. So there's a real, I guess, one of the best examples of this type of subduction zone worldwide. And that's actually one of the reasons why a lot of our colleagues overseas have come here to do this research. So our goals, principally of our part of the experiments, to look at the rock properties along the interface, try and image that plate boundary zone to investigate north-south changes. So that little map there shows you that the area offshore Gisborne behaves a little bit differently than the region offshore Wellington. In the region offshore Wellington, we know the plate boundary is stuck. And we know that the region offshore Gisborne here, it's moving. Nonetheless, we have these tsunami earthquakes in 1947. So we're trying to understand that contrast in properties. So we've done these experiments, so that little bar at the bottom indicates our work that was in the beginning of the summer, from mid-October to February. And then we did a kind of a second detailed experiment offshore Gisborne here in January and April 2018. And the final bar there is kind of a little flag to show you what we're going to do in 2019. Okay, this is a movie here, though. So if you could push the, whoops, go. You'll need to push the button over, hover it over that map and set it going. So it's an earthquake. Yeah, it's the Kaikoura earthquake, and we're looking here at a ground motion model. So that as the waves propagate, the red and yellow are a measure of how much ground shaking is there. So we can run it, and you can see, interestingly, once it gets to Gisborne, we have a little bit more ground shaking just offshore. So the reason we have that is because we know from the modelling that we've done that there's a great thickness of sediments offshore, And so it's those thickness of sediments that are causing the waves to amplify in that region.
Ask the question, the timer running. So was that movement across our country in 7 seconds?
Yep. 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 It's keeping going. So you can still see actually some kind of residual, this is waves that get stuck in that basin and that sedimentary. And it's, you can just, I'll just get Heather to replay that. So the message here is that this is just one event. This is Kaikoura event, and we've run a lot of other models, but this gives you an idea of the way that the ground responds and the way that the energy propagates. And the better we know the structure and the physical properties, the better we can model that response. So, and there's a little kind of message there at the bottom. If you feel long and strong, be gone. So I just want to give you the civil defence message there. Okay, we'll continue. Right, so this is a bit about the experiments that we did in October to mid of February. And as Pat suggests, we did have instruments on the property up the Waimoko Valley, and we had instruments, in fact, all over the Raukuma Peninsula and in a transect between Gisborne and Opotiki. We had 45 stations there, and we had a total of 118 stations. So those were the seismic lines that we recorded in the red, and we had, in addition to that, we had seismograph instruments offshore. Those are little orange bullets. And they were borrowed from Japan. And that was the ship that we used, the US ship. So the seismographs from the US, UK, Japan, and the ship from the United States. And most of the land crew, most of the people that did the work were New Zealanders. Okay. In addition to that, while we had those instruments out for the 4.5 months, we also recorded some seismicity. And so that little box just shows you that it's 1 hour of a record, and the little bars indicate where they are. You probably can't see that, but those were the 90 or so instruments that we had on the Raukuma Peninsula. You can see the earthquake. That particular earthquake sequence was off White Island, and so we had a really good record of earthquakes across the total array for the 4.5 months. And we'll use that plus the ship sound sources to build this CAT scan image. That's what we're doing. So that's the kind of regional project to look at the whole of Raukuma Peninsula. And then the second project we did was this area offshore Gisborne. So we have more instruments on the Waimoko Valley and the Waimata Valley as well, plus those 100 OBSs we concentrated in that region offshore, just offshore Tairāwhiti. And the idea there is to get a more detailed CAT scan, if you like, directly in the Gisborne region because of the unusual slip behaviour that we're seeing in the subduction zone. So we've already got a preliminary CAT scan image. These are seismic energy responses in the 3D volume. And you can see that we can cut and dice just like a brain scan. And geologists interpret those images, and you can see faulting and all sorts of fantastic stuff, actually.
You can actually see through it.
Yes, so it's an image that we can actually see, just like a brain scan in there, and it's not pretty colours, but we can make it pretty colours. And Donald Trump would say, that's great, that's really great. And we had fantastic weather, and we recorded unbelievably good data. So this is the idea of continuing the experiment. So what we didn't capture last time to complete the brain scan is that we didn't have energy onshore. So this is the experiment that we proposed to do in February. We plan to have 5 shot holes, of which we will explode up to about 300 kilograms of explosives. And we record that energy on the transect between Opotiki and Gisborne. So we've already started planning for that work, and we're in consultation with the communities and yourselves. And we started working with landowners, and we'll continue that in the coming weeks. So the idea there is that each shot hole will be consented. So we have to go through a consenting process for that. That will be about 50 meters deep, cased hole, and explosions.
You don't make that trigger a bigger earthquake like this now?
I hope not. I don't think so. No, no. So these themselves act like earthquakes. These are our earthquakes, what we call active sources, and they're way down in the low magnitudes, magnitudes 2. And Murray wants to interrupt me here.
Through Madam Chair, I can tell you that the amount of explosives we use at Mangapuhi to fix our lake was more explosives than we used in this one here. Yeah, we use.
Sounds like a lot.
It is a lot.
It is a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot.
We used half a ton in one blast, so they're using probably about 1/3 less than that in each of these.
Yeah, because we concentrated on the borehole, then we will be working with. We worked with Orica last time we did this. So we did this experiment across the Wellington region in 2011, where we had 12 shot holes for that experiment. And we used Orica, and so we used their health and safety procedures and their explosives expert, and we designed that shot so that the energy was going downwards. And that's one of the reasons that we use a borehole, because it confines the energy.
What did you find out from that research?
Okay, so in the Wellington region, this is what one of the reasons we come north, is that region is part of the plate boundary where it's experienced locking behaviour. And so we did that work, and now we want to contrast those properties of the rocks that we observed there with this region to the north. In 2001, we did an experiment through Hawke's Bay, but that was about 18 years ago now. And so we've learned a lot on how to do this. And we probably won't go back to Hawke's Bay because we can resurrect that data and compare it again to north and to the south. So are we finding any gold? No, alas.
I wish.
no rainbows. I think, yeah, so the outcomes for Tairāwhiti, one of the reasons why we're doing this, is we want to improve those local earthquake and regional simulation models. So the information that we gain here can make those models that you observe for Kaikoura more accurate. So we can get a better handle on the ground shaking beneath Gisborne or offshore Gisborne or wherever. We want to use this information to get a better idea of how size sources, for example, can we build this into, can the information build into a real-time tsunami warning system? And then ultimately, we're trying to build the business case for extending GeoNet offshore. So that's the real goal here is GeoNet provides really good information about earthquakes and timing of earthquakes and information that goes to CDEM. And it would be so much even more informative if the network extended into the marine realm.
Those machines, do they stay in the ground for the future shaking and monitoring?
Well, GeoNet does. Our experiments, they just stay for the duration of our experiments. So in that February time window that we'll be doing our second part of the experiment, they will just be there for a week. So there's little tennis ball holder shaped sensors sit in the ground, and they will stay out, as I said, for a week. So they'll record our explosions plus any other earthquakes. So there's a little chart there that kind of shows you the implementation pathway. This was part of our MBIE bid. Just shows you our boxes in the blue, science is at the bottom of the kind of value chain, and then we feed into national hazard model, tsunami hazard model, GeoNet, we use the East Coast Lab as a community engagement, and then ultimately to you guys as one of the end users. I circled the emergency managers, and we're hoping that the information ultimately will inform you guys at some point, hopefully.
I was just going to add that although our recording instruments don't stay permanently, the material properties and stuff that we find out through this information do feed back into those permanent stations, so they will improve ongoing earthquake locations throughout the region.
So the ones that you've got still in location right now, you're not reading them at all?
We are. So we would have been actually going out next week, Katie, and servicing those instruments. So they're recording onto a disc, and we download that data from a disc. And if the weather wasn't so bad, we'd be out there next week recording that. So the last time we serviced was in February.
Yeah.
So we'd like to actually get the data off them, because the longer they stay on the ground and we can't get to them, then the potential to lose information if we lose an instrument is greater.
So is it going to collapse?
It's not going to collapse. We go back in October and recover all the instruments, and they'll actually be out.
Contact with the landowner would probably help you access it even now in the wet weather, because most of us have got a vehicle that we can take you to those sites rather than you having to use your own, which you did when you came first.
Yeah, we also have an LUV. And we would probably.
And so, just out of interest, then, is this what you, one bar graph of this, is that what you secure from each of the sites?
Yes. Yeah. So one little wiggle is one station.
One bell.
So I've just smashed them all together to just show you and it helps us actually. That's how we pick events, is if you can stack them like that. You can see those bars as black bars with each earthquake in that sequence over an hour. It's pretty active.
Thank you. And it's interesting. So how many people on the team, just for the benefit of councillors, were quite a number in your team?
Oh, there was a lot. So in the first part of it, October, November, there was about 15. And then when the Brits came, they came in December, January. Gosh, there was about 30 of those guys. Yeah.
So there's of international interest as well, isn't it? Which we need to, be recognised, because I think it's great. Yes, there's a large team. Sorry, Councillor Cranston, you were going to ask a question?
Yeah.
Reference the long, and strong.
Yes.
But I was quite interested and concerned when you said that we might not necessarily feel a strong earthquake to get a tsunami.
Yes.
Will this have some way of monitoring the potential of a tsunami without having the actual earthquake?
So that's not my work, but that GNet are busy trying to develop the tools to do that. So the Earthquake Commission, CDM, have charged them with, we need to fill this gap between earthquakes that we can't feel, but nonetheless cause tsunami. So what we can do about that,
It's amazing that no one's actually able to make a machine to detect it. Say, there's one coming next week.
Prediction. Yeah, unfortunately not. Yes. Yeah.
Dr. Cave?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We obviously are doing some work on tsunami modelling at the moment, and that does include some re-evaluation of the 1947 events. The critical thing about it is it's long or strong, and the 1947 earthquakes, while they weren't large, so only magnitude 5, they were still very long events. They actually lasted for around about 3.5 minutes. So a relatively mild feeling shake that keeps on going, which was felt here, is the trigger that this is a near-field tsunami risk, and people should consider evacuating.
That should be long or strong.
It is long or strong.
No, it's
long or.
Is there a difference between, like the shaking of a long one and the rolling of a long one?
Your button on your speaker, thank you. Upset Councillor Fenn.
I'm not quite sure.
Well, I think part of the understanding is that that long shaking that's not very strong is maybe rupturing the rupture velocity is slower, which allows the water to build up as it ruptures. So that could be part of it, but hopefully there's probably material property differences involved in how those rupture. Probably it doesn't rupture long once and then strong a second time.
Yeah, so the other thing is that in 1947 we didn't have the network that we have today. So I kind of caveat, it'd be good to show actually a map, ask GNet for a map of what seismographs were, what GNet looked like in 1947 compared to today. So we actually are better instrumented as a country, and we will continue to be better instrumented going forward.
Thank you. Are there any, Councillor Stoll?
What is long? 1 minute.
What would be long, considered long for an earthquake? 1 minute?
Oh yeah, 1 minute, 2 minutes. I tell my sons when they were at school in Arnhem Bay that if you couldn't stand up and it continued and you were falling into the floor, then please get up and run.
Hit the road.
Are there any further questions to our scientists? No. Thank you very much, Dr. Hennies and Dr. Jacobs. It's really great that you were able to come today, and maybe next year, after the next tranche of investigations, you can come again and update us.
Happy to come back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Good to have you here. You're welcome to stay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It is interesting. Have you got your speaker on, Councillor Fenn?
Sorry. Just in the report, the transposing of the figures there and the funding amount there, they're different.
On page 17?
16 and 17. It's got
6.497 on page 17.
Yep, on 17.
And 6.479. Good spotting.
Yeah, just
thank you
just
very
for
much.
consistency purposes.
497 and 479. Thank you very much. That's noted. Thank you, Councillor Forrihinger. Moves the recommendation on page 16. Thank you. Moved Councillor Forrihinger, seconded Councillor Stolt, the report be received. In particular, notes the content of the geological and nuclear science presentation. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Just because council officers have got a range of other matters at the moment, should we be doing the dog PMAs first? No, we're happy to fit in because I understand council officers have a number of other pressing meetings. Are we fine on the program? Right, we're fine on protected management areas. Thank you very much, Ms. Easton. The paper is 18258 on page 19. And we have a presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this report is reporting on some work that we've been doing over the summer period. And I would just like to thank the Department of Conservation for the assistance they provided in this. We wouldn't have been able to do the work without them agreeing to allow one of these staff members to be allocated to work with the council for a period of 4 months. Obviously we paid for that, but inevitably it just disrupts their program quite a lot, and it's been incredibly helpful. So just would like to acknowledge that. So essentially, I've got a presentation which just kind of goes through the pictures that mostly that sit alongside this. So our protection management areas, if I could get this to work. Which way do I point it at that? It's had the green light.
It's got a light.
It was on, but it doesn't like me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm a competent operator trying. There you are. Thank you, Nick. Okay, so our protection management areas, these are the areas that are identified in our Tairāwhiti plan as the most significant vegetation in the district. But they were actually based on surveys that were done in the 1990s. And so those were done as part of a wider national survey by the Department of Conservation, looking at the range of vegetation types throughout the country. These are they are a vegetation-based identification, so it's not looked so much at what animals, flora and what fauna might be present in the areas. It's based on the ecology of the vegetation. So this survey, these areas were identified in our Tairāwhiti plan, I think in the mid-2000s. But we have in actual fact never really been out in any systematic way to look at their current state, monitored them. And I guess that from the work that we've reported to you at previous meetings, we are aware that though these areas have a degree of protection in our Tairāwhiti plan, consents have been issued to clear some areas that we have permitted activities that allow for clearance. And so we didn't really know what the state of them was. And I think that it would be fair to say we actually went into the survey a little bit fearful that we might find that there's been, you know, that we've lost quite a lot. And I guess if there's a headline on this, it was actually that the findings of this work have been very positive. And we are very grateful to all the landowners who let us onto their properties to look at it. Just in terms of what we provide, so we do provide a bit of assistance with possum control in those areas, but otherwise, they're pretty much council's engagement with them is very small. So from this unknown state of health, we've now got a bit of an idea because of doing this summer resurvey. So Don McLean, the dot botanist, led the work, and he started with a desktop analysis and was developing a methodology that we hope to apply right across the district to assessing as many of these PMAs as possible. He then resurveyed 48 of these in the southern and western part of the district. That was primarily because it's the closest area, so we were trying to get as much use of his time as possible. And so he's developed a report with preliminary findings, which is summarised in this report for you. And that was providing useful information to us to inform the biodiversity work programme. And then, of course, we hope to continue the survey next summer. Okay, so just in terms of the desktop findings, so we've got 315 PMAs and they do range in size. And I've got an error in my table there, but the bulk of them are kind of in that 25 to 100 hectare or 5 to 100 hectare size. And I guess that just if I cast my mind back to when these areas were identified, what they were is they were supposed to be the best example of a particular vegetation type or ecosystem in what we called an ecological district. And the region's divided up into 4 ecological districts. So you end up with a situation where we've got, for example, quite a small PMA that is a cluster of puriri trees, which are the southern limit of puriri in New Zealand, so very important, but it's quite a small patch. And so the basis that they were identified for was around ensuring that all of those representative and important areas were protected. I think that it's fair to say that over the years, possibly that's not how we do it now, and that's other work that's been reported to you is about, you know, what do we need to do to retain our biodiversity values, that kind of thing, and that work is really showing us that larger areas of bush are where we should be focusing our protection effort because they hold more values. But it is important to say that even though a group of, say, 10 puriri trees at the southern limit might not have a great biodiversity kind of value, of course, they're really important trees in terms of what they are scientifically, and they're probably also marvellous trees in terms of their, you know, individual value. So we did look at, as part of the desktop work, what's the legal protection status. So about, 21% of these PMAs are legally protected through covenants or kawatana under the Ngā Whenua Rāhui provisions. And then we did a bit of spatial analysis. So I've just got a series of slides to go through for you, just looking at the different parts of the district and what we've got. So on this map, the green areas are our PMAs in the northern part of the district. The red areas are where there are Ngā Whenua Rāhui protections in place. And what you can see from that immediately is the Pukeamaru area is the area that's the largest amount of legally protected Ngā Whenua Rāhui. But actually the other Ngā Whenua Rāhui covenants that are in place don't fall on our protection management areas. So they're in place for other areas of bush. And this is actually a pattern we kind of see throughout the region, that actually the lineup of where people have covenanted, so those proactive landowners who wanted to do that, doesn't always lie with where we've identified protection management areas. One of the things that's quite different about this part of the district is that most of the protection management areas are actually within large areas of bush. So they're that really important piece identified in those surveys. But actually they're often surrounded by kānaka, and I guess you could say their ecological integrity is maintained because they're part of a larger area of bush. And also they themselves are large areas. So this is where we have the sort of 100 hectare or more PMAs, a lot of those in this part of the district. If we move south a little bit into the Waipu area, we've got a couple of really large PMAs just up. These two here, right on the boundary of the Raukumara range, but otherwise the rest of the PMAs in that area are generally much smaller. Again, much smaller than the ones further north. So these are the kind of the 50 to 100 hectare sizes. The yellow areas there, those are the QE2 covenants. So you can see again, there's not a lot of relationship between the QE2 covenants or the Ngā Whenua Rāhui protections with actually the areas that are identified as our highest priority vegetation. If we move into kind of more the central area of the district and we're into area which is predominantly pastoral farming, we can see that there's a lot of the PMAs are quite small and they're not really connected with each other very much at all. So these are actually predominantly the ones that we surveyed in the field survey this year. And then if we move into the southern part of the district, again, sort of some a bit bigger, but we're in the pastoral farming areas, but we've got a couple of big areas that are in these forestry areas. And this yellow here, that is our Wainaki Bush Reserve, Wainaki Waterworks Bush. So that's actually not identified as a PMA in our Tairāwhiti plan, but it is of course, you know, one of the most significant pieces of bush in the district. And so I guess that that again reflects how those PMAs were identified, is that if they were already protected, they weren't included and scheduled in our plans. So the original surveys were all field surveys, so they walked into every one of these pieces.
I could hear we want to hear the whispering. Yeah.
I will save it.
So just moving, I guess this was interesting, particularly, so I'm not very good with this machine, clearly. This was interesting for us as well, just thinking about ecological connection. So this is that a lot of these PMAs are associated with the Hangaroa River. So there's kind of a connection there. And then also, actually what we're finding, and when I get into the results, is that being within forestry areas creates an ecological connection as well. And I guess that when we're thinking long term about how do we manage our biodiversity, those ecological connections are really important for maintaining the resilience of these areas going into the future. So I guess that's one of the things that our desktop work has shown. So in terms of the field work, so these are the PMAs that were visited, these yellow ones amongst the green, so these ones here. So what we tried to do is select a kind of representative range in this area. We knew that Don wasn't going to be able to get to all of them, so he wanted to get to lots of different types so that we got a bit of a snapshot of how things were looking, and so those are the ones that were visited. In terms of the makeup of them, a mix of ones that were in forestry and farmland and a few coastal areas, and also again a sort of a mix of sizes. Because he predominantly worked in this sort of central and southern part of our district, these were mostly the smaller PMAs, so that's why there's most of them in the less than 50 hectare size. So when he came to look at it, and I guess this is an important thing for us thinking going forward about how we manage biodiversity, we've got a range of different types of ecological areas that are protected as PMAs. And the ones that I guess provide the greatest diversity of species, have the really old mature trees, are what we call primary forests. So these are areas that haven't been logged in the past. Wainaki's an example of that, but there are others within the PMA network. And so these are the mature forest that has very high values. And here's an example of a great one in an area that is a PMA and also got a QE2 covenant. I think this is actually Councillor Seymour's property, but you can see the sort of tree that we're talking about in primary forest, you know, this beautiful large puri tree that's dwarfing the person standing next to it, which that might be your husband, is it? Yeah. So these are pretty special areas when we're talking about primary forest. We don't have very much of this left in the district, so they're very important. Then we get into, I guess, what we call modified primary forests. So it's still original, but it might have been selectively logged. And so these also are areas that will have emergent, in this case, kahakatea, so big mature trees. And these are the sorts of areas that we, well, they're kind of spread throughout the district, a range of those. And then we have what we call secondary forests. So this is the regrowth, essentially. And this is probably the majority of what we're talking about in the more developed parts of the region is actually secondary forest. And so that often will be actually Kānaka-dominated forest, but just with some of the other things starting to come through. And in, over time, this will grow in species diversity and richness. And that's kind of what you see inside well-managed areas of secondary forests, that you've got really good regeneration coming on there. But we also then start to see, well, what has been happening to our PMAs. And I guess that we have seen that from this survey that a lot of them actually have no regeneration occurring at all. And that's primarily because of grazing. And interestingly, there's a difference between the two types of forest, the original forest, how it responds to grazing versus the regrowth. And the original forest, the primary forest, it's the stuff that's really not able to withstand being grazed. So essentially, it's full canopy cover, these big mature trees, and there's not much light in the forest. And so there's not actually, the regeneration rates would be slower anyway, and all of those species are very palatable to stock. So they pretty much do what's done there, they clean it out. And so essentially, without fencing, this forest is going to die because there will be no regeneration. With the primary forest, even where it has been fenced, and actually I think this one has been fenced, it's a good example of it, takes quite a number of years. It's really old forest, it's not got fast rates of regeneration to recover from all of that stock access. And so I guess this gives us, I think, some clear directions about where we should be putting our effort in terms of the assistance we provide landowners, that in these kinds of blocks of forest, actually fencing them from stock is going to deliver the best biodiversity benefit and the best long-term protection of that bush. Then we move into weed impacts, and I guess that it's probably no surprise that those PMAs that are closest to the city are the weediest ones generally. And so here, it's not the primary forest, the really old forest, but it's the regrowth, the secondary forest that's most at risk to weed invasion. And so we're starting to sort of see some useful things in terms of us about what's the kind of assistance we can provide landowners in different types of forest. This one, unfortunately, it's got Mexican daisy, a carpet across the floor, so that'll be suppressing regeneration as well. So in terms of the PMAs on farms, I think that it's really important to state that there's some landowners out there who are doing a really great job of looking after the PMAs on their properties, and they're mostly doing that without any help from the council. But sometimes they need help from the council, and to do that great job is something that we're getting, this is a benefit to the whole region. We're seeing here is from the slides, the primary forests is resilient to stock grazing from secondary forests. So if we're going to provide fencing assistance, that primary forest is really important to get fenced. But also, actually, if we've got stock access, then probably pest control isn't the priority, because we need to try and get the stock out first. They're doing the greatest damage. And so particularly in those small areas, really saying that without stock inclusion, pest control isn't really a high priority, because it's not going to make enough difference to the health of the bush to be where we should put our resources. And I think we've sort of gone through this already, the fenced versus unfenced. This is the same piece of bush actually, but this part's been fenced, so you can see the regeneration, this part unfenced. PMAs in forestry, I think this is something that's a really positive finding from this work. Overall, it looks like PMAs in forestry are the ones who are doing best. There are impacts on the bush areas from harvest, and I've got some photos there, but those are outweighed by the long-term benefit of being in that larger area of forest, the buffering that provides from sun, wind, and also actually because the forestry companies do post-harvest pest control so that their pine trees don't get all eaten by pests. Deer. And deer and goats. And probably the main issue with PMAs in forest areas is weed invasion, and particularly that sort of period after the harvest when they're vulnerable to the weeds that we see in pine forests like pampas, but also in some areas, particularly in secondary vegetation, wilding pines and our coastal PMAs. And as I said before, forestry is actually playing a really important role in terms of the ecological connections between PMAs, and I think that's been really valuable learning from this work. Just an idea, so this is recently harvested, so you can see that there often is, you know, we've lost limbs there and quite a lot of damage to the forests, to the PMAs within the forests. But also this side here is just showing the rates of regeneration. All that light, of course, it allows everything to go, whoa, great, I'll just come back really fast. And because you've got the seed source from the bush, it does come back very fast. So that's really positive. This is just a PMA of wilding pines. So this is what we're seeing a lot around Tokomaru Bay, sort of Anoro Bay, that kind of area, those coastal areas. The native bush is not very tall. It's got quite a lot of light gaps, and that's where we're seeing the wilding conifer problem. And I guess that that's a problem that we're experiencing nationally. There is a wilding conifer management strategy. But it's just something that we need to be aware of, that some of our PMAs are quite vulnerable to invasion from wilding conifers. So in terms of implications for what we do and how we support landowners who've got PMAs, I guess just that message that actually fencing is really important, particularly with those small and medium-sized remnants amongst farmland. That'll deliver some really good biodiversity benefits, we believe. The detail is it's most critical in locations where you've got high stocking rates of animals, which of course that makes complete sense. They're looking for more food. And that fencing of primary forest is the highest priority. Don only got to look at 8 PMAs, but his feeling is that they are 8 large PMAs, that those are generally more resilient against, you know, not a surprise. They're more likely to survive in the long term without fencing. And so that priority for fencing those really large PMAs is less, and that's where we perhaps should be targeting our weed and pest control work, particularly pest control, is that they're not being impacted so much. So stock grazing, they're being impacted by all the pests. In terms of next steps, so we are just finalising the report, and we'd like to make that available obviously to all the landowners who allowed us on our land to survey the PMAs. We've got some individual suggestions for landowners about sort of information about their particular PMA, and if they're interested in doing management actions to support those, what those might be. I think that we need to be thinking about, in light of this, how we target our Natural Heritage Fund. Traditionally, our Natural Heritage Fund has provided a lot of assistance to people actively planting. But one of the key messages around biodiversity is that actually we've got some really awesome areas that exist, and protecting those is going to give us actually the greatest biodiversity benefit, rather than planting new areas. It's great for people to, particularly riverbanks and things like that, to get out there doing that. Some ecosystem types like wetlands we have very few of, so they really do need that active restoration. But actually, if we're talking bush, rather than planting more, let's protect what we've got, put our effort into the pest control and where appropriate the fencing. This work particularly helpful for us, how we target our biosecurity assistance and our site-led programs, that when we've got really large areas of bush, that those are the ones where we really should be making a big effort on the pest control particularly. And then also in this survey that was done, we particularly looked at a whole range of PMAs that are up the Waimata in the Waimata catchment, and that's will be reported back to you in a bit more detail to support how we might go about doing more restoration work in that, because there's a lot of interest from a range of the landowners in that area about how we could create a sort of a reasonably connected ecological restoration of some of those PMAs. In terms of our, sorry.
Sure. Question, please. Just while we're talking about this, how receptive are landowners and farmers on to you allowing you to go on there? On their land.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I just don't think I can state enough how helpful and supportive the landowners have been. And I think, you know, in the end, it's very easy. You know, my job is principally regulation, to fall back on regulation as the way to achieve things. But regulation is about bottom lines. Regulation does not achieve improvement. And the willingness of landowners to be involved, to let us on their land, the work that they're doing is actually what is going to result in the good biodiversity outcomes. So we've been really happy at the response of landowners. So just on that, I guess, we're hoping to continue next stage resurvey over the next summer. We'll be using students for that, but again, looking for Doc to be assisting us just in terms of guiding that. And, you know, again, I have to say, been a really great collaboration with Doc to do this work. So that's my presentation. If there are questions on the report.
Questions in the room? No, that was excellent. Thank you very much, and a good report. I'd just like to see us, all the comments that Ms Easton has made are absolutely valid. And QE2 does make available the legal costs, because when you put in a QE2 covenant, that is actually legally surveyed, and they pay for that. You still own it, but it is surveyed and it's on its title. And actually, council still does give a rate remission, I think, for QE2 covenants on land. And they do have funds from the Crown for partial fencing. It's not always total fencing, but I think if we could work more closely with QE2 as well as the landowners and as well as Ms Easton's team, then we get more protected properties. And while the QE2 covenants there didn't match necessarily with your PMAs or with our PMAs, it still is a very positive exercise that landowners have chosen to go through. And QE2 covenants can protect either native bush, or they might protect limestone cliffs. They protect a whole range of natural elements that a landowner wants to see protected as he has done in his lifetime, he or her, but not changed when you sell that property. So it does protect them in perpetuity. So I think there's lots of opportunity for this council to work more closely with them. And it's really good to hear the suggestion that maybe some support for the maintenance of those pieces of bush that are there already with PMAs, as opposed to the new planting, albeit it's good to see some work that GDC has funded happening along the bank of the stream at Puawa this morning. The fences some work was done a couple of years ago, a bit of work is being done right now. So a lot of landowners are really keen to protect what they've got. They really are, Councillor Fenn. I mean, they've chosen to put those properties, to put those aspects into protection. And I just want to reiterate the great relationship they've had over years with people like Kerry Hudson and Trevor Freeman. Landowners really keen to work with council officers because they can share the knowledge that they have. So I think we do have good working relationships with landowners generally. So the paper has some recommendations on page 20. Are there any questions to Ms Easton? Thank you. Any further questions? No. Moved Councillor Fenn, seconded Councillor Stoltz. Moved Councillor Stoltz, seconded Councillor Fenn. The recommendations are on page 20. You haven't mentioned a budget, and we're very focused on budgets in this organisation right now. So is there some money set aside, albeit you will be working with students and Doc?
So through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's how we propose to be doing it. The students they're a very cheap and effective way to do field work, and having started my career in the field as a student doing this kind of work, I can say it's actually a really great thing that we provide for our local students to get this experience as well. These are the students that we hire are always, they're our future scientists and hopefully future members of our team and working in companies in Gisborne. So great to give them that opportunity, also to get out to hone these skills.
I'll put the recommendation which has been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary carried. Thank you. So we move to the item 10.3 on pages 26 to 59, which is the Integrated Environmental Planning and Regs Activity Report. Thank you very much. And the first paper, and which is repeated, dare I say, both page 29 and page 30 have exactly the same information on them.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I'd just like to take you through the report and report on updates in terms of any of the major projects that we have. So while the report mainly relates to the environmental services and protection activity, because of our reporting system, it does generate other parts of the reports that unfortunately go to other committees, but there's nothing that we can do to fix that at this present moment. So there are a couple of things in here in terms of major projects, and then we'll go through and take any questions on the individual activities and how they're reported against the KPIs. The MAR project, and I do know that we have Mark here and Lois who are able to answer any questions on that. But just to let you know, we're off, the stage one's all complete now. We have got resource consents granted in terms of the drilling, and we've got contracts for the drilling and actually have started or will start in the next couple of weeks. Well, it might be a bit, Mark, if you'd like to come up and give us a quick update.
Yes, the drillers.
So again, thanks.
So Honours are going to drill the 2 monitoring bores. They're actually in Gisborne at the moment, drilling another bore. So as soon as they finish that, they'll start. They were due to start the 18th of June, but due to the bad weather, they're probably a week behind.
Thank you.
So that's in terms of that, and in terms of the resource consent for the rest of the work, that's in a hearing and scheduled for August 2018, as I understand it.
We haven't got an exact date, but it should be in August.
So full funding for the project is yet to be confirmed, and that will be as a result of the hearing itself.
We've lodged a second funding application to ECT for the remainder, so we're just waiting to hear on the outcome of that.
How much was that for, please?
It's approximately $500,000.
Thank you.
For
oh,
it says 398 in here now. When I look properly, I have read it. Time frame. Well,
time frame.
Yeah, we haven't got a date yet, so we'll go. I guess it'll be after the next meeting.
Yeah. Sorry, the resource. So that's obviously dependent on resource consent hearing, which is scheduled for August. That will obviously be confirmed after the resource consent has been granted, or if it is granted. Yeah.
Freshwater plan appeals.
Freshwater plan appeals. We'll just have a quick update on that, and I'll just ask Lois to give us a quick update on where we've got to on the appeals.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, we had 2 weeks of mediation on the appeals, and I have to say it went really well. It was great that all of the parties were willing to meet to mediate. We got through a lot, and in fact, we're at the point where we have quite a number of consent notices that we are able to get signed off through the court. So I think that we dealt with, off the top of my head, sorry, I think we've dealt with all of the regional policy statement matters and agreed all of that. We've really, I think, dealt with nearly everything in the water quality issues as well, which was really great. That was quite a big couple of days of mediation, but and so those are really substantive things that we've managed to get agreement across all the parties. Lots of other smaller things, those are particularly that we've dealt with a lot of those issues. So we are at the moment looking at a second round of mediation to try and get through some of the other matters. Some things we just ran out of time. Actually, I think we would have got there if we'd had a bit more time. So we're looking at August for scheduling some further mediation.
Thank you. Any questions? No. Back to you, Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'd just like to go into the performance measures, and I understand there might be some questions over some areas and how they're actually reported. I do have the various activity managers present who might be able to answer a bit more detail if you require that. So in terms of the overall amount, performance targets were met or exceeded activities related to the district plan in terms of land use consent applications. But overall, I note if you turn to the different periods, this activity, in terms of the resource consent inside of things and processing, there was a little bit of slippage in terms of the district plan consents. What you'll notice that the KPI doesn't actually report on the regional consents. So that will be amended through the reporting system when we go into our new KPI performance that we look across all of the resource consents. But as you can see, there is quite, we are getting quite a bit more in terms of the regional consents, and so there has been slippage in timeframes, or we've had to put them out to consultants. We look to address the shortfall in terms of the staff shortages in the new LTP. Are there any questions around the resource consenting side of things?
Or should we work through the document by page?
Okay, we'll go through.
And on page 31, I think Councillor Burdett comes particularly to talk to us about the animal control, which is at the bottom of page 31. Have you got the button on, Bill, Councillor Burdett? And I think the gentlemen from dog control or animal stock control are in the room. Thank you.
A large number of requests for service led to animal control performance measures not being met. And then we go over into page 31 and you look at the operating expenditure in terms of money that's supposedly been spent on the Tapuia pound. And the question there needs to be asked, I thought that was a GHL property now. So an explanation, please. And I do know in talking to staff, and I'm not going to have the print this bag because they complained about the lack of action and getting that fixed. Then we go down the bottom and despite requests.
Do you want the answer about the fence first, or do you want?
Yeah.
Could we have that responded to? Because I must say I've written myself that same question. It says the capital due to fencing the animal compound at Tapuia and the pound and purchase of health and safety equipment. Wasn't that done quite some time ago though?
Through Madam Chair, yes, it was done, finished late last year. So yeah, the fencing has been done. There's still some work to be done. Just a little bit of maintenance in the yards, and as far as the dog pound is concerned, I've been told that GHL are now going to put a septic tank in their system in there to take the build it up. For the benefit of everyone, I was asked to go and look at it because the fences were disgusting, and the dog cages are very, very smart. They might not have a septic tank, but they are very smart and tidy. I did note that. But can Mr. Zanham tell us, since we did pass over all land to the holding company, properties that council had, those type of properties, and the Tapuia grounds and land was one of those things. Why is GDC paying for the fencing if maybe, yes, it does have got too many on. Why are we paying for the fencing? Why, I mean, short of needing to get it done, and otherwise it might not have happened. Could we understand that, please? Yes, through Madam Chair. The reason that we've had to pay for some of that is that in their agreement was that they do existing fence. So they will fix existing fence. The bit of fencing that we have paid for is the fencing that we fenced off the bush. Yeah, so
was the existing fence repaired at the same time?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, back to Councillor Burdett.
Chair, can I have an assurance that it is up to scratch and 100% usable and safe and tight to hold stock?
It will hold stock. Yeah.
Thank you. Next item concerning the Chair, you've heard me go on, I think, Mr. Zahn. I've spoken to Chief Financial Operating Officer. In terms of animal control, share the rates, dog registration, late fees, they get $180,000. $180,000 from the transport agency, which I have in the past said. 31 at the bottom. In the past, we have all lobbied the transport agency, given that we know the stock on the road issues on the coast. And despite having repeatedly asked, no one can give me a breakdown as to how this money is spent.
I'll ask Mr. Zanham.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Burdett. In terms of the money, I think I've answered before that the money is spent through both in terms of the stock control that goes on and the animal control, because animal control staff do respond to stock control up on the coast. Some of it is given to the stock truck in terms of running of those and the vehicles. And so it is spent across in terms of staff, budget, response, and maintenance of those vehicles, which are due to be replaced. Some of them are getting very old and actually have to be replaced.
Fully understand that, Mr. Zaman. There are 2 permanent stock control officers up there and 2 that, well, I suppose they're permanent, who are on 20 hours a month. The way it is operated leaves a few questions. However, that's not my domain, that's staff. But in terms of the 180,000, even having gone to the transport agency, and I see in the paper tomorrow that you have to report back, even they couldn't tell me exactly how this money was spent and where it was directed to. It's just a general question that it's all spent up there. Well, I need to know that to satisfy myself that I'm not.
So through you, Councillor Burdett, I've got some actually tried to get some figures for you in terms of the breakdown of how much stock control we've actually done across the region, in both in terms of on the highway network, which is what the money for the transport agency is funded for. So just in the last year, in terms of roaming stock and state highway, we've had 314 requests that we've actually responded to across the network. And I'm not just talking about the East Cape. I've got some other figures in terms of that. And in terms of roaming stock on our actual other roading network, we've had 250 requests. So as you can see, that's well over 500 in terms of response. That's the amount of RFSs that we're actually dealing to. And I think Ross can attest to that's the amount of work that they're actually doing.
They do a good job.
Yeah.
I don't argue the point about that, but it is how they are required to do the job that I do. Well, as I said, that's operational and up to staff, how they set it up. And you will find if you check, most of those requests for services have come from me.
Yeah.
Because people have rung in.
Yeah, and so we are aware of those. What we're actually looking at as well is the MOU with the transport agency, which we are actually revisiting, because that only requires a certain level of service request, as you know, and we're actually looking at working to have some more staff, or how we actually change that we might actually have more staff time into the service request for animal control, because the agreement is a bit outdated, and that's a work in progress.
Thank you. I'll go home a lot wiser tonight.
Are you concerned, Councillor Burdett, that there still remain animals loose on the highway? Is that what's behind it? Ask Mr. Jones. He won't. Mr. Jones, can you just let Mr. Burdett give us this information?
It's the follow-up, Madam Chair.
Well, that's it's the follow-up.
It's the follow-up to ensure that the job is done. The current policy is 3 phone calls. If no response, they have to go and attend to the stock. Get the stock. It's a safety thing. Get the stock off the road. Well, you don't know if it's been done, and no disrespect to the staff, because I think they do a good job.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any further questions? Sorry. Yes, please.
Sorry, through Madam Chair. Look, I agree with you totally there, but if you don't know the job's done, please call us back and let me know, because if my staff aren't following up customers, I will definitely come down on them and let them know. They need to be following up customers. That is part of our protocol.
The after-hours service is a problem too.
After-hours service. Yeah. Well, that's helpful for council officers to know, because then they can follow that up, especially when there's specific instances if you don't think the message has been passed on, because nobody, least of all council, wants anyone killed on the road from running into a horse or a stray animal.
Yeah.
Well, that's what you're being told. Make sure we give some feedback. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for raising it.
And thank you for that, Madam Chair. We are aware of a lot of messages and emails and things after the fact, but not actually logged at the time when we can actually do something about it. And we are trying to move people to actually report it first rather than send through pictures and things days after the fact, so that by the time an officer actually gets up there and actually looks, they're well gone. And some of this is wild stock as well, or, you know, and so it does present some problems.
Thank you. It is important and it's worth raising. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions on page 31 under the other two items? Otherwise, we'll move to the next page.
One page. Nick, thank you for a very thorough report. When I read it and afterwards, not talking about any detail in here, I thought you reported on a few performance measures that were not achieved for obvious reasons. We know there are some staffing issues. And I know we're going into, not staffing issues, staffing vacancies. And as of the end of this month, we hopefully we have budgeted to have a fuller complement of staff. When I thought about that, I thought to fill those positions, you do require a certain expertise and maybe local knowledge of our region. And I was wondering how confident you were that we will be able to relatively quickly fill those vacancies that will come up soon in the new 10-year plan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, Madam Chair, in response to Councillor Stoltz, we have actually started recruitment process, and we have got some very good applicants, both in terms of that. So some adverts, as you will see, are out now in terms of the resource consenting to try and get those on board. We actually have managed to secure some in terms of resource planners, and are hopeful of filling those positions.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Other questions from councillors through the report? Thank you, Councillor Stoltz.
On just an information question, on page 37, where we talk about the dogs, I was interested when I read around the campaign that you will be running, encouraging menacing dog owners to register their dogs for $1. I'm not 100% I understand what is being achieved, because aren't everyone supposed to register their dogs full stop? Because then I might say, well, my big fat Labrador, I also only want to pay $1 to register. You understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah, but Councillor Stoltz may well tell us it's menacing to get it paid for.
Yeah, but to me, why does menacing dogs only charge $1?
Can the council officer explain, please?
Through Madam Chair. Yes, I agree. What the campaign is about is getting the dogs that aren't in our system, so we know where they are. And we're talking about a menacing dog. Don't we all want to know where a menacing dog is if it rushes at you or your children? I'm sure if you ring us up, you want us to know where it is. And as far as people, yes, we had them last year ring up and go, my dog's menacing. According to my record, it's not. Unless it is identified as a breed or action, it's not a menacing dog. So, yeah, as far as the question goes, it's really about getting to know where those dogs are, where they live, who do we come down on, where do we go to find the dog.
I cannot agree more with what you're doing. That is exactly what we are trying to achieve. But in the context of other dog owners, don't you think it's a little bit unfair? The dogs that usually will not cause any trouble, like my big fat brown Labrador, I pay the full 40 or 80 bucks, I can't remember how much. I just, when I read this, I thought this is disincentivizing people to just, like normal regular dog owners, register their dog for the full cost. But I hear what you're saying. You're trying to find out where those people are that will fully come and register their dogs. It just stood out to me as a little bit unfair.
Thank you, through Madam Chair. What it looks like is we need a bit more definition around what a menacing dog is and what is it considered to be, and in particular that those types and breeds that I carry my, yeah.
Can you just tell me how many did that process flush out last year that you didn't know about before?
76.
76? My goodness, just shows you that would have gone on being unregistered possibly.
Yes, and Madam Chair, exactly that. Those dogs are now on our records. We can now follow them up. If they don't get registered this year, there's infringements. We can now then uplift because hopefully they're still there, or we can start tracing them and finding those dogs. If they're not going to get registered, also out of those 76, they were all desexed.
And microchip?
And microchip.
Fantastic. I see what you're doing.
Oh yeah, I totally agree, but I do see your side as well.
Councillor Forrihinger?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in addition in regards to that, like I'm hearing from Mr. Zaman that we're going to be bringing back more information around the definition of menacing dog. It'll also be good for the sake of the committee to bring back information in regards to the punitive measures that having those menacing dogs on our registers allows us to kind of take. So what those extra things are, like the $1 registration is one part of it, but what else does that allow us to do in addition to the definition of menacing dog?
It'll be in the dog policy, but I'm sure council can add it to a paper. Councillor Ben?
A question on the same subject. If we're going to charge $1 for these menacing dogs, is this going to actually create more menacing dogs in the future? If it's going to be $1 to register them, is it going to create more?
A gentleman just explained that they have to be identified as menacing. Can you go through?
Yes, so to be a menacing dog, as is by breed, which is up to my team's discretion. Like if they say it's a pit bull, if you disagree, we say yes, sweet. You disagree, take it to the vet, get us a DNA at $600. Most of these people are not going to do that, or action. So it's rushed at someone, it's worried stock, it's bitten someone. If it's bitten someone, it's dangerous. And that's $229 to register that dog. So yes, we are running this campaign. It's a one-off. We're only doing this while we've had funding from the government. This is not going to come out of our pocket. And once that money is gone, we will no longer run that campaign.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Any further questions around that? Councillor Burdett. And which particular bit? The Waipu catchment, yes.
Yep, I brought it up this morning at because there was a bit in the community development meeting, and Keita Koheri responded as best she could. When you read this, at the end of it, and I understand that the council has an obligation to work with Runanganui, all the other agencies. I asked the question, where was the landowner? The people that actually, both sides of the river, the farmers, the trusts, the corporations, sole traders, they pay the rates, they pay the wages, and they pay the bills, and there's no consideration. At this point in time, I know, and I have said at full council, there are a number of interested bodies who have had meetings. Probably the most successful one was held last month at Wharangi Marae. There is another one which some of our staff participate in or will participate in, to be held on the 19th of this month. But and we all know, if you want to be successful in a project, you have to take people with you, not stand up there and tell them this is what's going to happen. So
thank you.
I'm just asking Mr. Zaman, how did this report come to be here? I guess filling the committee in. But who was the author?
So through you, Madam Chair, I'm the author of the report, and so happy to answer any questions from Councillor Burdett. I think just in terms of this project and how it's set up is under the Memorandum of Understanding between Gisborne District Council, the Crown, and as personified by Ministry of Primary Industries, and Te Rūnanga-Nui o Ngāti Porou. I would tend to agree with Councillor Burdett's comments about actually the people who are in the catchment need to be much more engaged, and I think there's been a lot of feedback that's come through that actually there's a disconnect, but it is, the project is managed in that sort of tripartite way, which does mean we have not got complete ability to drive it as we see fit. It's a joint decision-making process.
Thank you for that, through you, Madam Chair, and good on you putting this together, because it came to my attention. But in terms of what I have said, the council is the regulator, and I keep repeating that. For all the other hui that come along, or people that ring up, at the end of the day, the council is the regulator. And I stress again, those people on both sides of the river are the stakeholders. So thank you, Madam Chair.
I think in support of the comments that Councillor Burdett has made, I have heard him make those comments again. And while the governance group is these people, I think, as Ms Easton has described, when it comes to actually doing something on the ground, it's going to be absolutely critical that landowners are involved. And I note in the last paragraph, progress has been slow over the last period because of changes in MPI Wellington-based staff, and that's been raised in relation to another matter that's been drawn to our attention. Thank you, Councillor Burdett, for bringing that up again. Are there other questions with respect to other projects identified in this report? I note the swimming pool fencing has slipped back the monitoring because there's not been time. So we just need to, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. We just need to make sure that is picked up again, Mr. Zaman, because we had one child drown last summer in this town, didn't we? So we need to keep a finger on swimming pool fences. And while building is important and building consents need to be attended to, we do need to make sure pool fencing safety is well understood. On page 41, we've been given some updates on compliance issues that are under review, and Mr. Zanham might want to make some comment. I've squiggled in the margin, there are a number there. Are there any questions of anyone to Mr. Zanham, or do anything extra you wish to raise?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I wanted to do is, after the meeting, talk to councillors in confidence about processes that are ongoing, more in terms of clarity of role. So I'm happy to take anything in that session, but would like to restrict it to that.
Public excluded. Thank you. Right, thank you. Since it does relate to personal individuals. So moving on through the report, are there other matters that you wish to raise, anyone? Councillor, we'll go to Councillor McLean and then come back to you, Councillor Burdett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 53, the activities summary is very exciting, isn't it? Is it? Don't know if you call it exciting or abuse of our parking people and others around the city. I just find some of those figures absolutely staggering. Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting comment there that 7 beggars were moved on. Where were they moved from and where were they moved to? It's quite an interesting thought as far as I'm concerned, because were they actually beggars or were they homies? Or were they both?
Sorry, through Madam Chair, I'll have to inquire about those individual cases. The enforcement manager's just left. But,
I just think it's interesting,
yes.
Isn't it? Thank you.
It's also interesting that 83 young people weren't at school when they should have been. If you look at the second to last line.
I can tell you it was not
Nice one, Councillor Cranston. Councillor Stoltz.
I want to ask the question, please tell me if this is not the approach ask it. It's on page 43, and I want to ask in relation to forestry consent monitoring with what we've seen in the last 2 weeks.
Can I advise you that those were matters that will be raised shortly and public excluded?
I will wait for public excluded. Thank you.
It is a matter that's under review by council at this time, and so it would be good to have in-depth clarity for you from Mr. Zanham and his team.
I have one interesting. On page 44, the person that complained about the town clock. That was a very interesting noise complaint. Yeah. Would that be a shop owner or someone who is working close to that all the time?
Through you, Madam Chair, was complaint from one of the apartments in the city.
Okay, interesting.
Thank you. And I think at the top of, thanks, Mr. Kumar, at the top of 47, I think we have had, Ms. Easton might be able to answer it, the fanworm exercise, and in that project that with further surveillance in mid-May, I believe there were some more fanworm discovered.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, there were 4 fanworm which were discovered, 2 in the inner harbour area and 2 actually on a vessel which had recently arrived back into Gisborne Port. We just waited, all of those fanworm were collected, put in formalin, sent down to NIWA for identification to see if they had spawned, but also in relation to the ones that were on the vessel to see how old they were, because what we're trying to understand is whether, as we suspect, the vessel brought them into Gisborne Port or whether they were actually, arrived on the vessel from waters in Gisborne Port. So we're at kind of that's quite an important finding for us because we haven't previously found fanworm on any vessels, and it does mean that we probably need to look at stepping up our information and to boat owners about the need for them to maintain, as required under a regional pest management plan, just a slime layer on their boats. This vessel, as soon as the owner was made aware that he had this pest on it, was immediately hauled out and cleaned. And we hope that it hasn't bred, but we're just still waiting to hear that information. But I think that it is a bit of a wake-up call for us that we are going to need to do a lot more work with actual vessel owners in the port. We can't just rely, as we have done on surveillance, but actually we have been working with the port on getting proactive messages out, but we really need to hammer those home that it's really important that we don't spend all this money clearing the port of pests that then just gets reintroduced through poor behaviour. Should also just add, I'm not sure if it's in here, but we have been working for, it seems like forever, but probably only a year on a Top of the North marine partnership with other councils, other regional councils who are in the northern part of the region, and we are looking at doing a joint marine pathway plan, which will come back to you for a formal report. But what that would do would mean it would require essentially a marine passport for boats that are moving between ports, and would enable us to put in place rules to say not only does as we have in our pest management plan, that vessels have to keep their hulls clean, but actually that they need to provide evidence of this if they're coming into a different port. So for us, the main risk areas of vessels coming in are from Tauranga and from Auckland, both of which have not just Mediterranean fanworm, but other marine pests. And so it'd be really great to actually progress this marine pathway plan to help us manage the movement of vessels so that they don't spread pests.
Thank you very much, because from this report it would seem that each time we've done surveillance there have been fanworm found. There's only, we've done 3 lots of surveillance now, haven't we? Is that correct?
So 3 mentioned, we've done 3. We've been doing surveillance now for 3 years. We've found fanworm at every surveillance, and every time they haven't been spawning, so they've been immature. We have had real difficulty to get access to the main berth where local ships are tying up to. I guess it's probably not the right term, sorry. And so it means we haven't been able to check that area every time that we've done surveillance. I think we've only in the 3 years been able to do it twice. And it does raise the question that we are talking with MPI about whether there is in fact some fanworm that we have not found that are located in the area potentially reinfesting waters. So that's a question we do need to answer. And the other one is whether vessels have at times arrived with fanworm on their hull and reintroduced it. So Those are probably quite key things that we do need to sort out, and we need to work, I think, more closely with the port on that.
Thank you, because it is important. It's just as bad as a velvet leaf in a corn crop, you know, isn't it? Mm. Thank you. Councillor Burdett, did you have further questions?
Activity specific, sustainable bush country. It's my understanding, and I think I'm correct, the council were going to do the wetlands on most of the plots. The remaining 104 properties, is that specific to overlay 3 issues?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's 104 properties with overlay 3A on the properties.
And further to that, Madam Chair, things that I know from our trustee has been coming. A lot of that country north is our trustee administered.
Yeah, Councillor Burdett, just perhaps to save it being re-litigated today, we did have a substantial paper that identified them all last 6 weeks ago, and we are working with Te Tumi Paeroa ourselves and MPI because they too, Te Tumi Paeroa, are concerned and want to see an ability to do progress. So we just want to,
okay, thank you.
Mr. Zanneman will be following that up.
Thank you. One last thing I'd like to raise through you, Madam Chair, is Mycoplasma bovis. Just a quick update of where we are with that. You might have heard that MPI, the government, has announced that we're in a phased eradication progress. I'll look to Lois to update me on anything, but no cases have actually been found up in our region. But what we have been doing is through the Biomanagers SIG nationally, looking at staff don't want to be contributing to the spread of this disease. So we have looked at protocols through biomanagers as well that we're implementing and making staff aware of in terms of when going onto property and inspected in the whole gambit of what staff do in terms of inspections, but also in terms of compliance fitness monitoring. The latest updates from MPI in terms of how it actually spreads, the testing around it can give false positives and false negatives, so it's quite difficult to establish, and some monitoring of any infected stock has to take some time, and there follow-up measures. In terms of actual spread, it is very difficult. The main sources of spread of the disease is either through feedstock, that is coming from infected cattle, or through the movement of cattle. And the chances, although are quite minimal in terms of spread by people. Obviously, we still have to take precautions. And as you know, this was very strong when PSA, the same sort of precautions are required in terms of when PSA hit the kiwi fruit industry a few years back. So staff are mindful of that, and we are trying to get some consistency as well nationally in terms of how we respond. But at the moment, there are no reported cases, certainly in our region.
Councillor Cranston first, and then Councillor Fenn.
Yeah, just I realised that most of the incidents at the moment are dairy pits. Is there no incidents in dairy pits? Because that's our environment will be cattle and dairy cattle. We do that sort of back there here.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. In talks with MPI, there have been talk in terms of dairy herds. They weren't specific in terms of beef herds, but not that I know of. But that's it.
No, I have to say that the last Minister of Health and the Minister of Agriculture, and they are in some beef herds in other parts of New Zealand, because the issues they impact are exactly the same, whether the cows milk for milk or the calf milks it. So yes, there are some. I think what's going to be important for our region is where calves, because a lot of farmers bring in 100 kg calves in the spring, reared from dairy farms around the country. So that's what's going to be really important. I'm sure all of those pastoral farmers that do rear on bobby calf beef will be really careful about where their animals come from. And it will be in their interest and their neighbours and the region that's monitored carefully. And I'm sure MPI and Federated Farmers will be taking a real interest in that. Yes, sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nick, just in terms of what you were talking about before, false positives, false negatives, and sometimes we can't be sure, and requiring further follow-up on those false positives or potential. What sort of follow-ups are we talking about? What sort of timeframes are we talking about here?
Thank you. Through Madam Chair, as I understand it, what they were talking about in terms of false positives, if you, and don't quote me on these figures, but if you took, say, 100, what was considered to be an infected herd, or 100 cases infected, you might have 15 that you knew, 15 that weren't, that would come out. If they were infected animals, positive, that would come out.
Yeah. Or negative.
Negative
Yeah.
in that case.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, if you went the other way in terms of non-infected, you'd have that. So what I say in terms of follow-up, there needs to be actual testing in a period after a couple of weeks.
Yes.
In terms of where, if numbers had actually gone up or not, or down in terms of either positives or negatives. So there is some, as I understand it, it actually goes intracellular, so it's not, it's very difficult in terms of blood samples as well. So they have to take a combination of swabs and when at the stage of infection, so follow-up confirmation is required. That's the difficulty.
So in that time period, they're not going to be moved anywhere. I'm just thinking, you know, if it's 2 weeks down the track, oops, it's too late.
No, there are controls at MPI, and MPI are very much in charge of.
Yeah.
Control and movement and declarations.
Okay.
Councillor Burdett. Microphone.
How do we protect ourselves? You know, we've got cows coming in, we've got young cattle coming in.
It's up to the landowner, Councillor Burdett. It's not something the council can do. It's up to the landowner and federated farmers.
Look.
And the landowners are very aware, all our...
oh, look, it'll ruin me.
Well, we just hope not. But if people need to take precautions and make sure...
What I'm coming to, Madam Chair, is should not all this stock that's brought into the district be tested before it gets put on a truck? That's how I think.
Good suggestion. And so that is an issue between the purchasing landowner, livestock owner, and the selling livestock owner. And if that's a requirement that he wants to see that they come from a property that's clear
We've got
from.
so much to lose.
Yes, indeed. That's why we need to be very grateful it's not here and hope it never gets here. Other questions from the report? No? Is someone prepared to move this comprehensive report? Moved, Councillor McLean. Seconded, is that Councillor Forrihinger, did I see? Councillor Fenn. Moved, Councillor McLean. Seconded, Councillor Fenn. The report recommendations, which are on page 28, I think, 26. On page 27 is the actual recommendation to note the content of the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you very much. That's the end of the meeting, but we would like to have a briefing. So thank you, Mr. Jones. If anyone would like to just grab a cup of coffee and come back to the table, that would be